Good evening. Welcome to the Pullman City Council meeting for this Tuesday, September 13th. And yes, for our visitors, we do start things with the SEL clock. It's the most precise clock in the world. So anything we can do to support Schweitzer Engineering, we're doing it. I'll tell you that. With that, Dee, how about taking roll?
Mayor Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Benjamin.
Present.
Councilmember Dubin.
Here.
Councilmember Guido.
Here.
Councilmember McCall.
Here.
Councilmember Parks.
Here.
Councilmember Weller.
Present.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Under announcements tonight, the council members from each of Pullman's 3 wards will be hosting their respective town halls October 4th to the 6th from 6 to 7:30 right here in the council chambers. It's an opportunity to ask questions, provide feedback, and keep conversation going. August 23rd, the council approved the adoption of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee, which now seeks volunteers to fill 7 openings. Well, I can tell you right now, we've had some responses. We've got 5 applications so far. I want to thank Becky for being out there and recruiting for this, and some others are out there recruiting as well. We might mention that the city is hiring an HR manager, finance director, youth sports coaches, and more. You can visit our career portal. It's right on the city website. Learn more and can apply. Fall activity guide is here. You can visit Pullman Parks and Recreation online for programs and registration. You can buy a Pullman Aquatic and Fitness Center membership in the months of September. Get a 20% discount too, so that helps on your purchase online for the city's website. 2 projects, the accelerated street and sidewalks, are still in progress on Sunnyside Hill and Pioneer Hill respectively, and both projects are expected to be finished in October. Issued a couple of proclamations this past week. Coming up this Saturday is September 17th, and that marks the 235th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution for the United States of America by the Constitutional Convention. And whereas it's fitting and proper to accord official recognition to this magnificent document, whereas Public Law 915 guarantees the issuing of a proclamation each year by the President of the United States of America, designating September 17th to the 23rd as Constitution Week. Now, therefore, I, Glenn Johnson, the mayor of the city of Pullman, do hereby proclaim that same week as Constitution Week. Also coming up in October, and since this meeting here, we want to make sure everyone knows what's coming up, and that is the Domestic Violence Action Month. And so we have a proclamation for that. Domestic violence violates an individual's dignity, security, and humanity, and is a crime with sweeping effects on our community and safety and health. And whereas survivors should have help to find compassion and healing they deserve, and perpetrators of violence should be held accountable for their actions. And whereas all residents of Pullman should feel safe and at peace at their homes. And whereas our youth deserve information and education on healthy relationships, boundaries, and consent. And whereas Alternatives to Violence the Palouse is committed to ending violence in our community through prevention education and has been providing services to these affected by violence for over 40 years. Now, I therefore, Glenn Johnson, Mayor of the City of Pullman, proclaim the month of October as Domestic Violence Action Month. In Pullman community, I urge residents to reflect and honor victims and survivors of domestic violence in our community, and also use this month to take action towards ending violence on the Palouse. Those are the announcements tonight. Now we have some presentations. And the first one we've been looking forward to, because we know they presented over the city of Moscow. And here is the Palouse Groundwater Basin Supply Alternative Study. Kara Haley is our city engineer. Kara?
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and present to you a presentation that's really been in the works for the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee for a really long time. For those of you that aren't familiar, we'll refer to the committee as PBAC for the rest of this presentation, so I don't stumble over my words. I'm honored to be the current PBAC chair, and as such, I do get to open up the presentation today. I do want to introduce some folks who are here with me today. They're key folks who also represent PBAC, and they're going to help me give part of the presentation. So one of those is Tyler Palmer. He's our current vice chair for PBAC, and he works for the city of Pullman. We have
Palmer works for the city of Moscow.
oh, yeah, sorry.
I
City
have
of
to give him
Moscow.
that much credit.
Well, you know, we're
Although,
hiring, right?
Could have come in on one of those
I
applications
thought he'd
we
make a
had.
great human resources
He's
manager.
going for dual citizenship.
Thank you for correcting me on that. We also have Dr. Robin Nimmer. She's with Alta Science and Engineering. And then last but certainly not least, we have Celine Accord. Thaleen is our new executive director. She started in July. We're really excited to have her on board and to introduce you to her tonight. I also want to recognize Councilor McCall as well as our Public Works Director, Sean Coates, who are also here tonight. They actively serve on PBAC, and so they're familiar with the content of the presentation and discussion tonight. So why are we here? Well, we're here for water. As most of you know, water is our livelihood. It's absolutely crucial and essential to our community. You've probably heard a lot of tidbits in the news about water crises around the world and around our nation as well. Communities not unlike ours are finding themselves without basic water needs. And we're unfortunately not immune to those types of issues either, especially moving into the future. And we need to be proactive and ensure we don't find ourselves in a similar boat. So this brings about some really crucial questions. How are we going to get our water? How are we going to share our water? How do we ensure that we're going to have enough water for generations to come? So these are some of the key questions that PBAC continues to ask and work towards answering. And our overall goal is to ensure that we have a sustainable quality water or long-term water supply for the Palouse Basin region. So PBAC is comprised of several entities. We have the city of Pullman, we have the city of Moscow. We also have representatives from Whitman County and Latah County, as well as our two universities. We also have representatives from the Washington Department of Ecology, as well as the Idaho Division of Water Resources. And they're really the agencies responsible for water supply management in their respective states. All of us tap into the Palouse Basin aquifer system directly beneath our feet to basically get the potable water that we use and drink and irrigate with. And as such, it's absolutely key that we continue to work together as a unified region to manage this water resource. So a real quick background, a lot of you have probably heard some of this, but PBAC has been around in some capacity for several years. And the region and residents and folks have really known about aquifer decline in our region since the early 1900s. It wasn't until the 60s that the entities really put together more of a collaborative effort. And in 1992, a formal groundwater management plan was developed and adopted. So around that same time, so about 30 years ago, the aquifer decline was about 1 foot per year. With the groundwater management plan and a lot of concerted efforts since then, we've actually dropped that rate of decline to about 0.7 feet per year. So this slide shows the approximate boundary of our Palouse groundwater basin as we currently know it. It was actually recently updated by PBAC, incorporating years of research efforts and data collection. The truth about our aquifer system is it's very complex. It's not uniform, it's complicated. So it looks like a dashed line on the picture, but a lot of research and efforts have gone into developing that and seeing change over time as well. So one of the primary charges of PBAC is doing research and making sure we're making basically smart and appropriate decisions with the information that we have available. Real quick, I also noted on the last slide about the rate of decline actually decreasing over time. With that, for the last 30 years, we've actually seen roughly 1% average growth per year. And we have a lot to be proud of because our water usage has actually decreased in that same time period. This is encouraging. It's progress for sure, but we continue to see a decline, and we're still essentially mining from the underground resource that we have. To stabilize the aquifer, we need to push forward actively and look at getting some other sources of water. So this is where we get to today. PBAC has made a lot of good strides over the last several years to identify feasible options towards that alternate water supply. In 2017, PBAC commissioned a study that was completed by Anchor QEA. And this study basically evaluated 38 different alternatives. Many of them had been discussed 40 years ago. And it parsed it down into 4 projects. They looked at a lot of aspects about, how much water could we get out of these alternatives, how much water is needed, and are they even feasible from a planning level standpoint? So this was a really great start. And in 2020, PBAC hired Alta Science and Engineering to dive even deeper. Some of the efforts, not all, but I'll list a few, involved defining interim steps, updating capital and O&M costs, investigating big picture water rights on both the Idaho and Washington sides, and coordination and outreach to various wildlife and fisheries agencies. So the culmination of this effort is the final report from ALTA to PBAC. It's available on the PBAC website. It was included as part of the council agenda. PBAC did formally adopt this report at our committee meeting last month in August, but it's really important to know that it's not a final decision, but it should be considered more of a recommended direction of where to go from here. So we're coming before each of the member entities. As the mayor mentioned, we were in Moscow last week, and the goal of that is to provide an update and gain feedback to help us determine next steps. This really is the first step at kicking off a robust outreach effort to engage meaningfully with the public and to maintain positive momentum. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Dr. Nimmer, who will talk more about the study.
All right, hi, thank you very much for having us. Really excited to be here and talk about this. We've been looking at this for a long time. All right, so I'm just going to jump right into these water supply alternatives. I'll be talking about 4 of them, 4 plus, I guess. The first one is alternative 1, and this is a single diversion. Let me see, I got to find my, okay, here we go. It's a single diversion, so you'd be diverting water from the Snake River, and that would be piped to a regional water treatment plant, and then piped to Pullman, and then later you could further build out that treatment plant and divert the water to, pipe the water over to Moscow. This would divert water 10 months out of the year, and this is for direct use. This is estimated to provide 85% of the target, and where the target number comes from, it assumes a 1% growth over 50 years, and then also an aquifer stabilization target. And then there's also the potential to partner with the local utility for pump storage. And I also want to point out that these are dots and locations on a map, but the exact locations haven't been decided yet. And that, that may actually impact how much diversion you actually could get depending on where you pull the water from. Okay, alternative 2, there are 2 projects for this. The first one in Moscow, there's an intake and water treatment plant on Paradise Creek or South Fork of the Palouse River. And that would be for aquifer recharge. That would be diverting water 4 months out of the year. Then there's also a diversion on the North Fork of the Palouse River near Palouse that would be diverting water to a water treatment plant, and then that would be piped to Pullman. And again, you could further build out that treatment plant and divert water to Moscow. And that would divert water 8 months out of the year. And this is estimated to provide 82% of the target. Alternative 3 has 2 projects. The first one is South Fork of the Palouse River in Pullman, where there'd be an intake and water treatment plant. This would be for direct use and diverting water 8 months out of the year. And then on the Idaho side, it would be diverting water on Flanagan Creek, so it would be a storage and conveyance to Moscow to a water treatment plant. This would be diverting water 12 months out of the year, and that would be for direct use as well. And this is estimated to provide 100% of the target. Okay, alternative 4 actually has 5 components, and we'll start on the Washington side. So the first one is wastewater reuse. And let's see, then we have South Fork of the Palouse River diversion, and that would be for aquifer storage and recovery. And then moving over onto the Idaho side would be wastewater passive aquifer recharge, and also an intake and water treatment plant for the South Fork of the Palouse, for Paradise Creek, and that would be for aquifer recharge. And then there's also additional conservation of 15% with this, and this is estimated to provide 81% of the target. So after we were conducting this study, we were gathering feedback from people and really taking a hard look at this. We thought, is there anything that we could do to really pull from different aspects of these alternatives? And so what we ended up doing is removing the wastewater reuse for Pullman, and the reason for this is it's really expensive, and it's a great idea. I mean, I love the idea of using gray water for irrigation, but you just have to pipe it so far, and it's just really expensive for the actual amount of water that you get. So we removed that one, and we also took off wastewater passive recharge in Moscow, and then we made direct use for South Fork, Palouse and Pullman, and Paradise Creek in Moscow, but then definitely keeping that additional conservation component. That's very important. And this is estimated to provide 80% of the target. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Celine.
Thanks. Mayor, Councilmember Salina Cord for the record. So here we are today, focusing our efforts on modified alternative 4. PBAC chose modified alternative 4, and we'll work on naming these projects a little bit better in the future. But PBAC chose modified alternative 4 because the most important criteria for PBAC was a long-term water source and the cost of the project. So conservation is number one. We can always do more conservation, and the first step of this project would be 15% conservation. What does that look like? How does, all of the details there, we still need to further refine that. But that's a good first step with any of these alternatives, really. Excuse me. The other reason PBAC is recommending this alternative project is because it's direct use rather than aquifer recharge or aquifer storage and recovery. Just public feedback has been concerned about treating water and then putting it into the aquifer. So this would be just direct surface water use. The other reason PBAC like this is that the projects are separated by state lines. There are some water rights concerns about transferring water from one state to another, so this would keep the project separate across the entities. And then the other thing that we liked that Alta did was take pieces and bits from all of the alternatives and come to one conclusion for this modified alternative 4. Really, though, I think the message here today is that we have a lot of great options. And so while PBAC is recommending modified alternative 4 to all of our member entities, we can combine all of these alternatives piece by piece. Or if we run into kind of an obstacle or we see another opportunity with a different one, we can pivot really easily and focus on another one. But the point is that we have good positive momentum. We want to start moving forward on a solution. We want to start further refining these alternatives because we've heard a lot about aquifer decline over the years, but we need to start having some actionable steps. So what's next? Conservation, right? 15% conservation, we need to define what that looks like. It's obviously different depending on the user type. Residential is completely different than an industrial user like a university. And then we have talked about or have heard rumblings about just a community-wide conservation plan. So instead of the separate entities or counties saying, we're going to conserve and create this plan here, maybe let's talk about just a broader regional conservation plan. As far as further refinement, there's a lot of questions to be answered with this alternative, as there would be with any of the alternatives, such as where are we looking to divert water, where the pipelines would go, assessing the water qualities and quantities. We do have preliminary data, but we still need to dive in deeper once we put definitive dots on a map. And then, of course, timing. When would the water be captured? When would it, can we store it? Where would it be stored? And then just all of the questions that come up in between all of those other questions. Of course, there's funding discussions. Looking towards the future, PBAC does have funding from each of the member entities, and we've got a lot of stuff to do moving forward. So we'll be looking to our member representatives to talk about increased assessment fees, but also just to help fulfill those outreach efforts. We are coming to all the entities this month to present this to each of the groups, but then we have to get the public involved. We've seen a lot of these alternatives over the decades, and they have not been successful because there's not been a robust engagement process. So this isn't just, we'll do this for the summer. No, we're gonna probably do this for several years to make sure we're reaching as many people as possible while we're getting all of the data that we need to further refine these projects. And of course, we can explore more grant opportunities for continued funding for research. Just, it's a worthwhile investment while we have this positive momentum. And then outreach. As I said, we need to have robust community outreach, recognizing it's critical for our success moving forward. We're going to continue conversations and check in with other agencies, such as the state agencies, fisheries, the tribes, and then look into a little thing called water rights a little bit more. And that's where we might pivot a little bit more too. And then we do have a stakeholder engagement group, so we'll be leveraging them for how do we reach out and make sure we're hitting everyone within the basin boundaries. So today we're here presenting this to you. We'd love your feedback, or you can, of course, send us an email or send me an email with any ideas that you have, because each entity, each city, county, university, it's going to be a different outreach, different funding conversation with each one. So as far as what is next steps, we have our member entity update presentations in September. We've got a stakeholder engagement group kickoff in early October. This is also a plug for the Water Summit, the Palouse Basin Water Summit, October 18th. And then we hope to bring all of our member entities for a leadership roundtable in early November. And then, of course, public outreach will be ongoing for several months, if not years. And that is all we have for you tonight. So I can stand for questions. All of us can stand for questions.
Okay, comments or questions? Okay, Nathan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the in-depth report from Alta and the work. I had the opportunity to attend a few of the meetings and appreciate the discussion. I think there is something that did concern me from some of the meetings, which there are some partners missing from PBAC. And if I recall, I think one was Colfax. And so it's great you're looking at how to move forward. But a few things I'll just mention is the partners is one. And another one is, you know, the aquifer, it's extremely difficult to fully understand. And this hasn't changed much since my master's degree in bioregional planning at University of Idaho. And I feel also that, so it's a challenging topic, first of all, so I commend what you're doing. I was a little surprised. I discussed this previously. When I worked over at NASA Langley, there was the GRACE satellite we used. Now, when I ended up discussing it with the group, nobody seemed to know about this. Now, after that discussion, it was brought up, and I have the email, that it's currently too coarse to be used for PBAC-related studies. The spatial resolution is 300 kilometers by 300 kilometers. And they said it was a few years out. So I would hope that PBAC continues to kind of look on that edge, the cutting edge of technology and research. I know you are doing a lot of that, but I was very, very surprised that this technology was not understood, or at least nobody had discussed it. So those are my points. But other than that, we're in a tough spot. I understand. I don't like the option at all, but I understand we're in a difficult position. So I appreciate it. That's it. Thank you.
I can remember a headline many years ago. Bill Funk, who is head of the Washington State Water Studies here, had the pumping from the Snake River to Pullman in Moscow. And that's got to be like in the 80s that they were talking about that. So that proposal's been out there for quite some time. Francis?
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I appreciate it, and for all the time and effort. over the years that has been put into this, because this is a critical area for us. I did have, within the report, you use the word stabilization 23 times, but you don't define stabilization. Is stabilization just stopping decline, or is it returning it to a certain level?
Yeah, at this point, the stabilization would just be, holding steady. But, I mean, a greater long-term goal would be to see about actually recharging it further. But, at this point, we continue to see the decline. So our first step would be to get a handle on that. And then, there's potential. We don't know. It is a dynamic system, but there's potential that, depending on what that water source looks like, and technologies are constantly changing. I know in terms of conservation, I get excited because I think there's going to be a lot of really key important technologies we can tap into 20 years from now, 5 years from now. So that was a really great comment.
Okay, great.
So that's my interpretation of it at this point.
I assume that's what it was, but I just wanted to check on that.
That's a great suggestion.
My second of my three questions, the second one, with what's you've settled on with this alternate 4, is it provides an 80% of the target. If we're eventually trying to get to 100% of the target, is there going to be an easy add-on to get us to the next 20, or is it going to be something else that is actually, in other words, this one will give us 80, but then the next option is something that would be 80 again, and that we're duplicating effort and wasting some of our resources? And
That's a wonderful question. We kind of view this as, based off of all the information that we have and where the state of things are at, with crossing state lines and those things. This is the best spot to put our energies into right now. Saline kind of mentioned, we do have lots of eggs in our basket that we can go back to. We took wastewater reuse out of modified alternative 4, but if grant funding was there and there was a way to implement that, that's certainly something that could be added back in. With the information that we have available and where the state of things are now, PBAC's recommendation was this is the best approach to take, but we acknowledge as we dive further into it, we may have to pivot, or we may have to add in some of those aspects. We could have a local utility that's interested in partnering big time on the Snake River, and that could come back into the picture. But a lot of you have been involved around here for a long time and probably know that PBAC's talked about these alternatives for a really long time. And we feel like we need to take an actual step and really go down a path, and this seems like the best path right now. And it still opens up some options to pivot a little bit as needed. We're talking about direct use, but maybe, aquifer recharge comes back into the picture from a diversion or something. So I hope that kind of answered your question.
That doesn't. It actually adds a question. Sorry. Related to timeline, what's with this modified number 4,
Sure.
What's the timeline that you would hope that for Pullman and Moscow to embrace, and I'm thinking from the funding side?
Sure. As far as conservation goes, we can get started on that right away, and that's appealing with this alternative and encouraging. And if we did have to pivot to a different one, that's going to be advantageous no matter what. In terms of so the alternative that's being recommended has kind of an isolated project on the Idaho side and an isolated project on the Washington side. And it's complicated because we recognize that the counties also rely on the aquifer and the universities. So some of the leadership roundtable and the next steps is defining, who's going to take charge of each of these projects. How are we going to do that? How are we going to ensure that we're bringing everybody along and it's somewhat equitable, and some of that may fall down to grant opportunities and things that are available in each of the states. But if I had to throw out a number, my hope would be in the next 3 to 5 years we have some real momentum on some of these.
Great.
Does that sound right? Yeah.
They're smiling.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Then the last question I had is, you'd reference as a part of this package is a 15% conservation, and I'm assuming that's on top of current conservation that's
Yeah.
being done. And it sounds like you're still trying to identify what that how that 15% is going to be achieved. I would be interested, would it be helpful for us, other communities that have done this, so for best practices from other communities of how they've successfully implemented, a conservation level
Yeah.
at this level? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely, we can come back. The other piece to add, there's a lot of avenues we can take with conservation. I didn't hit on it on this slide, and most of us know it, but timing is a big challenge for alternatives and just in general. We use 50% of our water usage in the summer months when we're irrigating. And we want to use technologies, we want to be wise, we want to be welcoming and encouraging, but there's a lot of avenues we can take. And, one of those can be related to development. There's just lots of options. And Saline, we don't have anything specific in mind, but we'll be working to define what our options are. And she mentioned rumblings of maybe a regional conservation plan where at least people can come together and we can kind of all be on the same page. I think that's important because it is a shared resource to, it's kind of hard if Pullman's doing something really aggressive and Moscow's not, or vice versa. You lose some of that momentum. So that will be really important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See no other questions. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it. With that, we now come to our second presentation this evening. This is coming from R.J. Lott, our Community Development Director. And the legislature was busy passing bills with mixed opinions on some of these bills. And with that, R.J. gets to report on them. So thank you very much for answering the council's request that we get a full presentation on this. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, and good evening, Council. This is an annual update on housing legislation coming out of Olympia. Last year in September, I gave an update, and that really originated around Senate Bill 5235, which talked about a number of unrelated persons in a dwelling unit, and we subsequently made changes to our city code to abide by that Senate bill. There are no changes proposed or that I anticipate coming out of this presentation, but nonetheless, I thought that with housing being an increasingly important issue throughout our community, an annual report for what does come out of Olympia is still very important. So housing is vital to sustainable life, just as water is, as we just heard. And the challenges for some really are serious due to rising costs in our community. Housing is essential, whether it's for student housing, apartments, or single-family dwellings. It's critical to the recruitment of talented employees and the overall health and the economic development of the city. Housing legislation is a topic that staff does keep an eye on, and the effect it may have on the people of Pullman. So with that, we'll get going here. The first one is Substitute House Bill 1593, which is actually quite timely after the mayor's proclamation for the month of October. This expands access to the landlord mitigation program for victims of domestic violence. Very, very important. It's triggered when a resident terminates vacancy in accordance with RCW 5918-575. Victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, harassment, or stalking. To be eligible, the landlord must return the full security deposit to the tenant and forego any collection actions. And this took effect back on June 9th of this year. Substitute Senate Bill 5749 requires residential and manufactured housing community landlords to accept personal check, cashier's check, or money order for any payment of rent. This does allow for landlords to accept cash, but they must absolutely require them to provide a receipt for that payment. This also took effect back on June 9th. Engrossed Substitute House Bill 2064 relates to security deposits. This legislation creates requirements around the use of security deposit alternatives, provides a transparency of the product to tenants, including maximum insurance coverage. This took effect on June 9th also, and has added a section of the RCW 59.18. Substitute Senate Bill 1904, as introduced, this would have, meaning that it was not adopted, required landlords to provide at least 180 days notice for rent increases over 3%. As rent increase has become the norm over the past year or two, mostly due to a number of factors, including inflation, the lack of available housing, and many others, this would have allowed the occupying tenants to be aware of any increase well in advance. Senate Bill 5576. This is another ongoing tenant measure. As introduced, it would have amended the 14-day notice for the fourth time in 4 years, amending the summons to include both a clear line and eviction defense line, amended the law to clarify that a 14-day notice can be served after expiration of the offer of payment. This was ultimately placed in the Senate X file, effectively removing it from the calendars and the status sheet. House Bill 2017. This bill would have prohibited the use of criminal history as a screening criteria, except for sex offender registry information. It received a robust public hearing, but it did not advance. House Bill 1300, another act addressing security deposits. This bill would have required housing providers to make copies of estimates and invoices for any repairs and deductions available within 90 days of termination, defined normal wear and tear, prohibited deductions because of carpet cleaning unless the housing provider could not document a damage beyond normal wear and tear, repair and replacement of fixtures, equipment, appliances, and other furnishings. This permitted a tenant to request a walkthrough prior to termination of the tenancy and required the landlord to comply. Created a 1-year statute of limitation on collection actions for money owing for damages. And lastly, while this legislation was not passed, it was on the House committee on a party line vote of 6-3, but it did not come out on the House floor. The last House bill, or the last bill I should say, is House Bill 2023. This bill would have permitted tenants to file a civil complaint for any breach of landlord duties under the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, including a show cause hearing and trial where a material issue of fact remains. The bill received a hearing but was never acted upon. And before I finish, for anybody tuning in tonight or in the audience, this is a reminder that Title 15 of the Pullman City Code does relate to fair housing, and anybody that feels they may be a victim of unfair housing practices can contact the Community Development Department, and they can do a research and take a further look into that. Are there any questions of the council?
Apparently not. You might also mention, too, that we also are available to do inspections of rental facilities. And again, it has to have the permission, but that's another thing that community development and our city has been doing for a long time. And sometimes we never hear a complaint until almost the end of the semester or the end of the contract, and somebody might be living in a substandard situation, and they can have a city and building inspector come by. If you want to fill in on that one?
Yes, absolutely. So in case of life safety issues, a building inspector can inspect the residence at no cost and then provide a report of any issues that may came out of that inspection.
Eileen?
Yeah, the Whitman County Landlord Tenant Association fully endorses the inspection process. If you've got a problem, call. And it happens fast. I recently heard a rumor that says, well, we called and we didn't hear anything back. Well, you know, sometimes things happen. But boy, look, if you've got a problem, they'll get to you in a hurry. So if you feel like you're in an unsafe housing, if something's not working, or call, and the city will get somebody out there, usually within 24 hours, 48 hours for sure. And we'll take a look at it and make sure steps are taken if they need to be taken. We really, really, really encourage people to call. A lot of times this is a first living experience away from home for people, and they may not understand what their responsibilities are. They may not understand what safe housing is, and we want to make sure that they know if they're in safe housing.
Okay. Nathan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the report, keeping us up to date. how much outreach do we do on the, for instance, life, the safety inspections?
Yeah, great question. So with school starting mid-August for university students, we did place a article in our newsletter, and it did outline some of the issues that we can help resolve if there are some between the new students coming to town and the landlords.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to mention, anybody watching, anybody out there, I've actually used this myself. I rent. I've had neighbors who have asked me what they can do, and I've always sent them to building inspector. And a lot of people still don't know, and I'm not saying that's our fault. It takes some time to understand what I appreciated Councilmember McCall's comment. It's responsibilities, it's rights, but it's also responsibilities, and being able to understand that. But that inspection has helped so many people that I know of personally, myself included. So thank you, and glad we have that.
And as a retired professor, I've heard too many stories come near the end of the school year when they should have been making those comments very early in their rental career. So hopefully we get the word out. And RJ, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Next comes public comment. If anyone here in the audience would like to make a public comment on any action that we're going to take as a final action, there's a differentiate in there to make sure it's on a final action. And I'm taking a look. Seeing none, we will move on from there to the consent agenda. These items are considered routine in nature, and we'd like to have a permission to read by title only. Do I hear a motion to approve?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed with that? Pat O'Sullivan, our city attorney.
Okay, we have a motion to approve disbursements for accounts payable checks numbered 107807 through 107858, totaling $203,421.77. A motion to approve disbursements for accounts payable checks numbered 107718 through 107797, totaling $816,180.72. A motion to approve disbursements for accounts payable checks numbered 107798 through 107806, electronic transfers 75, 76, and 904 through 908. Payroll direct deposits numbered 79069 through 79413, totaling $979,019.59. Resolution number R-54-22, a resolution accepting the scope and fee proposal of TCF Architecture for the Pullman Transit Facility Master Plan and authorizing execution and delivery of the contract for said project. Resolution number R-55-22, a resolution adopting a fair policy for Pullman's public transit system. And finally, resolution number R-56-22, a resolution declaring certain property of the city of Pullman to be excess and surplus property and authorizing the means of disposal. And I missed number 1, a motion to dismiss with the reading of the minutes of the regular meeting of August 23rd, 2022, and approve them as submitted.
You got it handled. Very good. Any item the council would like off for discussion? Seeing none, the consent agenda consists of items 1 through number 7. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Moved and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we now go to the regular agenda. First item, Sean Colts, our Public Works Director, is here. Talk about a resolution authorizing the execution of a professional services agreement. Sean, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Give me a moment to load the presentation here. There we go. This contract before you tonight is a contract proposed with Welchcomer Engineers, who of course have done the Phase 0 and Phase 1 work for this project. And this would be for the design and bid phase services for the project downtown Pullman. Starting out with the Welchcomer consultant team, it's a little bit different makeup for this phase of the project. It's a team that's largely focused on the design effort for the work. Welchcomer Engineers is still the lead on the project, but they've got several specialists on the team. One of them is a landscape architect, one of them is an electrical engineer, and another is a geotechnical engineer. And that makeup has changed a little bit as we've gone from the planning phase to now the design phase. A little bit of background on the project to date. Welchcomer Engineers was selected for the project back in October of 21. The adoption of the downtown master plan was October 26, also in 21. The Phase 0 data collection work, that contract was approved on November 16, 21, and then the work was completed in January. The Phase 1 project immediately followed that, and the intent of that Phase 1 work was to get basically through the project feasibility phase, to boil all of those projects that were in the downtown master plan into essentially a fundable set of projects. And you've all seen this graphic a handful of times as we've presented to council on this. The intent of that Phase 1 work was, again, to take all of those projects that were in the downtown master plan. There's a lot of vision there, and boil those down into what ended up being 4 projects that council selected at the last meeting that we brought this information. So just to focus on some of the next steps here. Of course, we've done that preliminary design work that you see here in the Phase 1 elements of this roadway. The next step is Phase 2, or essentially the final design. And so that's the piece that we'll be working on between now and when we would bid the project for construction. And then, of course, the final step is to go into construction. So from the last council meeting on August 9th, there were essentially 4 elements of the downtown master plan that were selected to advance forward. And those projects totaled about $9.4 million in estimated construction and engineering work. So one thing I want to point out here is that the engineering fee is also included in those numbers. The available funds as of the current status is about $9.1 million. So we're over designing a little bit, hoping that we have the opportunity to be optimistic, we get better bids in and can do the whole thing. So basically, the elements that are included in this design contract are the Main Street project, the Grand Avenue project, Pine Street, and Olson Street improvements. The cost of this work, and I want to talk about this a little bit, is proposed at $1.156 million. And to talk a little bit about the background on that, this work represents about 7,000 hours of engineering work, and with the intent of trying to get that done so that we can hit a 2023 construction season, that's 7,000 hours in about 5 months of time. So it's a large effort, and so it takes a large team to do that, as well as specialists to get that work done. And I wanted to point out, I also have Phil Boyd with Welchcomer Engineers tonight to answer any questions on the detailed scope of services for this work. So with that, we'll take any questions.
Questions or comments? Okay, Megan.
So Sean, with the price tag at 1.1 and it was 9.6, right, that we have overall?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, are you guys feeling comfortable with the amount that's left over? Because we're taking this from the ARPA funds, correct? Mm-hmm. For the actual construction of this design? That would be my biggest question.
Mm-hmm. I am, and the reason I say that is that design number is essentially baked into the numbers that were included in that August 9th presentation. So the numbers that you see up here on the slide, it's construction and design.
Okay.
You finished?
Just one other question. Is there any opportunity are we far enough down the road in this design phase that we could not look at any possible changes or further input from the community, or are we pretty locked in?
It's a great question. And the intent of that phase one work was really to get all the broad brush strokes well defined. Because once you get deep into design, it's very difficult to change at that point. And so generally the rule of thumb is you don't want to change those big picture items of the design once you get to the 30% design stage. Because let's say, for example, you got the design team started and they got $300,000 worth of engineering work into the work, and then you change directions. It's really hard then to afford those changes at that point. So the goal is really to do that community outreach up front and get that big picture set so that we can do the detailed design work. And the other element of this is the time frame that we've asked the consultant team to meet. So if we're going to be ready to bid this project, we've basically got to have the design work done essentially by early March so that we can get a good bid for the project. So it's a very tight time frame to change gears at this point. It doesn't mean that we can't, but it's the farther they get down the path, the harder it's going to be. But what I will say is there are certain design elements that they're going to be working through, for example, where to place park benches, colors of pavers, details like that we still want to get that community input on. And that's not something that we could really get through the phase one work. So there's some details that we need to nail down. But at this point, the goal would be to really not touch that really big picture stuff, but focus more on the details.
Okay, thank you.
Considering all the hours they've already put in to even come up with these four things. Anything? Yeah, Francis?
Thank you. So when I think about a project, whether it's this size or a smaller one, the reason why we're having them do the work is because as a city, we don't have the capacity to do it ourselves. And if we were to task it, we would have to then hire someone from the outside to come in and do the work. And the fact that they're already familiar with the project, it helps in this. If we look at the number, and I know you said the number was already baked into the big number, the percent-wise of what you'd expect for this cost to be, is this in line with kind of the standard, industry standard that you would look at related to this?
It is, and as somebody who worked in the consulting world for about 13 years, I was very familiar with where those percentages should fall out. Mm-hmm. And to add a little bit of detail there, when Welchcomber brought their first scope draft to me to look at, I literally went line by line and looked at every single hour in that scope with them, and we did cut back in some areas. There were some elements that just I didn't feel like needed to be in the scope, so we cut those out. And an example of that would be the box culvert that is under Grand Avenue that takes Dry Creek flows. They had a structural analysis in there for Dry Creek. We're not going to touch that box culvert with the funds that we have. And so we pulled that scope out, and then just, basically we're making sure there weren't any of those types of scope items that really didn't need to be in there. So we did cut that back, but to comment a little bit on if this is something that we could handle with existing city staff, essentially to meet the time frame, the construction time frame that we're targeting, we'd have to have triple the engineering staff that we have now. So it would be really hard to be able to do that with our staffing.
Yeah, I mean, if we had the time to build it, design it for 5 years, then it's something you could do in-house. A follow-up question to Councilmember Guido as it relates to timelines. I know one piece in here is that this is not a road, all the roads are not roads that we control, but some of them are state highways. And in order to do work on that, DOT actually has to give permission for the work. And so I'm wondering, at what point in this process do we have enough of the design elements that we can pass it to them for them to say, yes, we agree with the direction you're going, you don't have to make any changes, as opposed, we're in the point, do we know that it's locked in, as opposed to they could come in and say, no, that's not acceptable, we want this instead, and we have to then redesign?
Yeah, and it's a great question. We've already reached out to WashDOT in the Phase 1 work, and we got their input to the extent that we could, being the concept level design. But WashDOT really wants to see a lot of the details, and so we're walking a fine line between giving them the big picture stuff and getting their blessing versus, they want to see all those details before they really give their final blessing. Okay. And my experience is you don't really get that final blessing from WashDOT until the very end. And so that's a challenge with this project. We're literally going to take our 30% design, our 60% design, 90% design, and then our 99% design to WashDOT over the next 5 months so that we get their input all the way along. In fact, we've already set our next meeting with WashDOT on this project. So it's that's a challenge, and honestly one that could derail the timeline and push it back a little bit. So we're going to be pushing pretty hard with WashDOT.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The sooner the better. Eileen?
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading this. And I wanted to let Phil know that I'm not going to bust his chops tonight. And I will pick on the typos of somebody else, but on a different day. I really enjoyed reading Dell's work, Dell Hatch's work on this. That answered a lot of questions, and I hope it answers a lot of questions for everybody. And the electrical engineering work was really comprehensive and really painted a picture. It was so well written. It really painted a picture of what we're going to see when we turn on the lights. So that was really, I'm really glad you included that, because I really enjoyed reading that and getting that visual picture of where we're going to be downtown.
Do we have a motion on this resolution?
Move to adopt.
Do I hear a second? Second, Becky. Thad, do you want to read the resolution, please? And if you can't find it, I can get it right now. The resolution number R5722. Resolution authorizing the execution of a professional services agreement between the City of Pullman, Welch Comer Engineers, the Project Downtown Pullman Project Phase 2, Design and Bid Phase Services. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item number 2 tonight is a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute a settlement participation agreement on the opioid. And that's Thad O'Sullivan.
Thank you. Sorry about, I'm a little nervous about my first presentation to the council, so I wasn't ready to read that last resolution. I apologize. So what's before the council tonight is a resolution to approve the mayor's signature on 2 documents that are part of the Washington Attorney General's lawsuit against opioid distributors. And just for a little background, in 2019, the Washington State Attorney General's office filed suit against AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal Health, and McKesson, filing nuisance and consumer protection claims. They picked those 3 because they were the largest distributors of opioid medications in the state of Washington. Significant amount of document and data and discovery, as you could probably guess. They had a 6-month trial in King County. When evidence closed, meaning before the parties gave their closing arguments, all the testimony and documents were in, the parties settled, and before it could go to verdict for the jury. And the result of that settlement was a $518 million settlement, resulting to be paid over 17 years. The net after attorney's fees is $430 million. That will be split. 50% will go to the state of Washington, and 50% will go to local governments. Pullman was not a litigating party, meaning they were not a named party in the case. However, they're included in the settlement because there's over 10,000 people living in Pullman. And so what is to be signed tonight is partially a release, meaning Pullman can't go back and sue these 3 distributors for similar claims. But in return, Pullman's share of, so it's 430 divided by 2 is 215,000 to local governments, and Pullman's share is 0.22% or approximately $473,000. That money will be used to combat the opioid epidemic and also pay for any harm that's been caused by that. So, in order for this settlement to become final, all of the litigating local governments, named parties, 100% of them have to sign it, and 90% of the non-litigating participants need to sign on to it, and we need to sign on by September 23rd of this year. If they don't reach that benchmark, then the settlement doesn't pass. The City of Pullman has already signed the One Washington Memorandum of Understanding between Washington municipalities, and that was signed in the spring, and that's where the different allocations were decided. So we also need to sign, so now to be signed tonight is a subdivision settlement participation form, which is basically the City of Pullman saying, yes, we want to participate in this settlement. And then the allocation agreement governing the allocation of funds paid by the settling opioid distributors in Washington State. Similarly, an agreement that needs to be signed by each local government in order to participate in the settlement and receive funds from that settlement. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay. Ann.
Yes.
Thank you for that information. It did help demystify some of it for us. My question is, and it may be too soon to delve into this, but the money is to be used by the city to combat the opioid crisis and I can't remember the second half, but my question is, do we have any more of a specific thought of how would the money actually be, what does that look like? Do we know that yet?
We don't. But one thing that I forgot to mention is that local governments can pool their funds together and develop programs, but there isn't a lot of direction yet. I think the first step is getting through this, and
Yes.
and then there will be a lot of local governments working in partnership to
Right.
figure out the best ways to use this money.
Thank you.
Originally, when they were talking, was law enforcement, public health, behavioral health. You just go through the whole list, even counseling in jails because of the drugs that they have to deal with over there too. So there's a lot of different suggestions on this.
So is it focused more on the things you just talked about as it's happening, or would there be some prevention dollars?
That part is still, I think, up in the air. I've sat through one big seminar with the Association of Washington Cities. We just had another one here recently, and AWC has been helping us through this whole process. And that's why we signed the thing back in spring. And Mike, you had some notes on this one as too.
Sure. There's an allocation agreement here in Exhibit A on page 67. It starts talking about treatment and some of the other things, and then it gets to Part 3, other strategies, and that's where there's a lot more flexibility if we're not going to be doing some of the specific things where it's talking about treatment specifically or partnering on that, or leadership. There's leadership planning and coordination is what the big headline is where I'm at right now. So I think that is a detail we would really want to work out and also maximize our dollars with our partners.
Any further questions? If not, do I hear a motion on this resolution?
Second.
Moving second. And Thad, do you want to read this one?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Resolution R-58-22, a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute a subdivision settlement participation form an allocation agreement governing the allocation of funds paid by the settling opioid distributors in Washington State, authorizing the mayor and finance director to take all actions necessary to effect the purpose of the settlement agreement and other matters related thereto.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item number 3 is a motion for the acceptance of a 2021 Assistance to Firefighter Grant Award. Ray Lamoureux is our Assistant Chief.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Back in August, first part of August, we received notification from FEMA that the grant you all authorized us to pursue back in November of 21 for laryngoscopes and driver's training for our aerial apparatus was approved. So we did not get the laryngoscopes, and I have a feeler out to our FEMA rep to see why, because this is the second year we've put in for those. And for whatever reason, they keep giving us our training money, which is great, but we keep missing out on those laryngoscopes. So we're going to reach out and see where we're going wrong with that piece of it. But we did get the training grant. It's $109,134. FEMA's obligation is $99,212 and some change, and our obligation is $9,921.28. That is really for contractual overtime and for bringing in a test team. Even though we do have some internal test proctors, you have to be certified to that level before you can actually proctor the test later down the road. So this initial test team will come in, certify our in-house folks, so then we can continue with this program later down the road with certified personnel. With that, I will take any questions.
No questions? Do I hear a motion on this motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
And that's a motion to authorize the acceptance of the 2021 Assistance to Firefighters Grant Award. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That we now go to discussion items tonight. First of all is a water quality combined funding program dealing with the decant facility project. And Clayton Forsman, our Deputy Public Works Director, has the floor.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and City Council. This grant discussion tonight is central to our plans to construct a decant facility for the M&O division so that they can properly manage the liquid and solid waste they generate from road, storm drain, and sanitary sewer cleaning activities, primarily with their Vector trucks. The decant facility is to be built on city property located east of Guy Street across from our M&O yard. A separate contract was awarded this spring to grade that site, create a level pad, and to extend utilities to make way for this project. The decant facility will be the first city facility on this pad. Our plans to construct this facility date back to October of 2018. That's when we submitted a grant application to the Washington State Department of Ecology, which I'll refer to as DOE, to fund the design of that project and construction. That grant was awarded in July of the following year, so 2019. And then consequently, we worked with DOE to negotiate a grant agreement, and we brought that to council for execution in March of 2020. Our original plan was to complete the grading of the site in 2020 under a separate contract. And then the following year, 2021, we would construct the decant facility. However, grading of the site slipped from 2020 to 2022 for a few reasons. The first reason was that in June of 2019, we were made aware of a allocation of funds from the legislature to the city to extend sewer to the new airport terminal site. So as a result, when we got word of that, the engineering staff working on the grading site were shifted to the sewer extension project, which we did successfully complete in 2020. So at that point, we were thinking, let's build this in 2021, grade the site. Hit with another setback there in the spring of 2021. We lost one of our engineering staffs who went and took another job. So by the time we hired a new refilled that position, brought someone up to speed and trained them. We're looking at 2022. So that kind of explains where we're at today. So again, going back to October 2018 with that initial grant submittal to DOE, that application was based on a very preliminary design and scope and construction cost estimate for the decant facility. That grant application had a cost estimate of $600,000 for that decant facility. And DOE would fund 75% of that. Moving forward, we requested design service proposals from consulting firms in late 2020, and then in early 2021, we selected Gray and Osborne, which was the most qualified firm. This consultant has extensive experience in the design and construction of decant facilities over the past 16 years, far more than any other firm who had submitted. That experience is really priceless as it has proven out what works and what doesn't, lessons learned on these decant facilities. They have helped us to navigate important design decisions over the last year and a half, given that experience. Through multiple design workshops and preliminary design concepts, it became apparent that the original cost estimate from the 2018 application was not reflective of what our M&O division needs for a facility. So currently, we're at a 60% design level with that consultant firm, and the cost estimate has grown as we've worked through that. This cost difference is really attributable to a couple major things. First, that original estimate in that grant application was underestimated by far. Secondly, we have all heard about procurement issues stemming from COVID-19 pandemic, and then of course, thirdly, inflation is at record highs right now. The current cost estimate is $1.6 million compared to the $600,000 estimate we originally went in with. So given this large cost change, the project is currently in jeopardy of being terminated unless we can secure additional funds. And so staff have explored options to secure those funds. We've talked with our contacts at DOE. We've walked them through what I just walked you through, explained why we're at this point, and they understand. They see the reasons for that large increase in construction cost. But unfortunately, there's not a way for them to amend the current grant agreement and give us any additional funds. However, they do see the benefit of the project, and they would support us by allowing us to modify our current grant agreement to design only, and then go and submit another grant application to them through the Water Quality Combined Funding Program to fund the full 1.6 construction amount. We feel that this is the best option, and DOE has indicated that they fully support this approach, as it is considered fundable and very likely to be awarded. So this current grant application program, it has applications due October 12th. It would provide 75% of those $1.6 million construction funds. Awards will be made in July of next year, so it would push construction of the decant facility to late next year or early 2024. So at this time, we are requesting input and direction from the council regarding our plan for this year's grant application. And if council is amicable to this, staff will bring a completed grant application to council for authorization at the October 11th council meeting, which is the last meeting available prior to that October 12th deadline. This concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Any questions in terms of basically going for this grant? So Becky, you got the floor.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you, Clayton, for that thorough walkthrough of what happened and when and why. That helps me understand a lot about it seems like good, solid reasons why this wasn't completed. I mean, it's shocking, the difference of the costs, and I appreciate your explanation. But even more, I appreciate you coming with a solution which sounds completely reasonable to me, and thank you for doing the work. Oh, I do have one question, though, that we are certain that we'll be able to get to it this time, though, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Any others? I think I'm seeing head nods.
All right,
Go
thank
ahead.
you.
And we also have to say that, we have a award-winning wastewater treatment plant, and DOE has given us awards 2 years in a row here. Is that sort of one of the reasons why we're able to have this great cooperation from the Department of
It certainly helps.
Ecology?
Yep.
Okay. Want to make sure we get the plug in that we are award-winning, so.
Thank you,
right.
Council.
Thank you. We now go to a discussion with council goals and in terms of research on the most talked about topic in this town, the empty buildings and how to deal with them. And Mike Urban, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. On your agenda tonight is a discussion on one of the goals, specific goals adopted on May 3rd, and that's to research and discuss implementation of city ordinance on empty buildings. This is not intended to be the discussion portion of that. When we started the information gathering, and I sent some links to council on the 5th of September, we're starting to get to a point staff-wise where some additional directions and some specifics would really do us a lot of good, so we could bring the right items to you for discussion, because the breadth that we're starting to see and how each city is doing things differently, staff just needs to understand a little better what the expected outcome that council would like to see with an empty buildings ordinance. Also to revisit if this is just for downtown commercial buildings only, or if this needs to expand to other commercial areas around town. But really what is, and I wanted the dialogue of what we were hoping to accomplish, or if there was anything that I sent that was particularly interesting that we should focus in on. So that way we bring a full discussion the next time we come back. So just looking for a little direction.
Ann, we'll go to you first.
My feeling is what our end goal here is to, first and foremost, make building owners accountable for the condition of their buildings, particularly when they're vacant, and to set some standards that must be followed to keep the property in good condition and safe. But also to, at some point, if they're choosing not to move toward occupying the building or finding an occupant for the building, it is, as an insurance professional, it is a liability, and it can affect neighboring or attached structures. So if we have a derelict building that's actually attached to a functioning building and something happens in that building, now we don't have it, the city doesn't have it, but it creates a problem for the attached or nearby buildings. So to just somehow, whether it's a fining system, if it's vacant for more than fill in the blank, then a fee will be assessed for, or something like that. Well, I think we need to have building owners have a little skin in the game as far as their participation and being able, and having a building in a city. So that's a starting off point, I suppose.
Megan, I saw your hand next. And then we'll go to Eileen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, I said Megan.
Oh, sorry, my bad. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
And then we go to Eileen, and then we'll go to you, Nathan.
Lots to say on this topic. I am really happy to see this as a goal and priority for the council, and it is a very hot topic of discussion. As a council rep on the DPA, the Downtown Pullman Association, and the tourism, strategic tourism, I just think it's high time that we address this. And I agree totally with Councilmember Parks that the goal is to bring some accountability to the owners of these vacant buildings. And I actually started doing some research. I've been researching this for quite some time, and I appreciate the links to the codes that you sent us, Mike, in terms of how other cities are treating this. The one that I liked was Auburn, and then Everett is also a model that I would like to see us seriously look at, where it requires owners to register with the city and give regular reports as far as their plans for what they're going to do with the building. Again, just keeping that communication going. And as Councilmember Parks said, I think we need to look at fines as well if things are not kept up to standards. And we need to do that on behalf of the citizens of Pullman because it affects how our downtown looks, it affects economics and tourism, and it's just high time.
Eileen.
Yeah, we have, I was glad to supply the Auburn code and the Everett code to my fellow council members as I have been finding them. There's two separate, the Auburn code is interesting in that there's two separate sections that affect empty buildings. And one of them is housed in the nuisance code, and one of them is in its own code under vacant buildings and building maintenance. So my thought here on this is, in terms of direction for staff, is we probably should make some sort of determinations as to where we want to house this code. Do we want to house it under nuisance, or do we want to house it under building and building maintenance and the planning department or our professional inspections? My personal feeling is that the nuisance code is convoluted enough, and that this needs to be in the professional inspections, this needs to be in the building code. Everett's is in their building code, and the Chapter 15.20 property maintenance code and vacant property management in Auburn's is in its own section. So nuisance doesn't really kind of get us there, and we've talked a lot about nuisance over the years, and when we do start talking about nuisance, then we get a little too far afield. I think the intent of the council, and I know the sentiment of the community, is to, with the downtown revitalization program going forward, this is a key element in the downtown commercial. And there's been some questions raised in council and in other places in the past as whether we can narrow this down to whether it covers just a certain area. We certainly can. North Bend is their historic district. Everett is as a central business district specifically. Seattle has another designation. So that is not really an issue that's been raised in the past, that if we had to do it for the whole community or whether just do it for the central business. And we can do it any way we choose to. And I think the sentiment of the community is to emphasize, if we're already spending $9 million, maybe we ought to make sure we're getting tidy around the edges the way the community has clamored for decades. So yes, we can. We can draw the line any way we choose to.
Nathan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologize for before. I think it would be remiss for me not to mention a lot of the effort that Eileen has really put into this. She's really given us a lot of information. I think also past Councilmember Brandon Chapman and Al Sorensen. This is at the heart, as has already been mentioned, the downtown. I know there's been a number of different projects. The old theater was looked at how to rehab that, and there were a number of different challenges there. So I am not an expert, so I will defer to either Eileen or one of the other council members who have given more research.
Okay, we've already heard from Eileen, so we go to Pat next.
Thank you, Mike, for bringing this up to us. It has been a long overdue subject of discussion, and it really came to the forefront in our tourism, our strategic tourism study that was completed by Place and Maine, and was one of the top items identified for implementation, and that is the blight aspect of it. So I think I agree with Eileen that Auburn seems to have had the best overall.
It's very
code.
concise, yes.
And some of our reservation in the past has been that we were under the misconception that there was a grandfathering aspect to some of these ordinances, in that we could enact an ordinance, but anything that was in existence prior to that would not necessarily fall subject to that ordinance. Auburn's is not. And so that was a key piece for us in terms of pursuing this further, that there is no grandfather requirement there. So that would be paramount to me in going through this ordinance, that we not have a grandfather adjustment there. So thank you also to all the counselors for bringing this, bringing enough attention to this that we are all in concert, I think, with what we need to do. So, and thanks for pursuing it, Mike.
Francis.
Thank you. I looked at two sides. One is the safety side, and then the other side is this abandonment blight. And I believe that our current code is accurate as it relates to safety. And so I don't think the safety is what's needed in this place. Instead, it's the side that is, if you have this abandon or blight, how do you deal with it? If the grandfather clause isn't something that has to be in play, then I really do like Auburn's. If there is a grandfather clause, and I wonder is in play, then I wonder if there's a way that you can actually charge everybody, but then return money if buildings are active, as an alternative way on that. But so I really like that. I did have a procedural question, though, and for our attorney. Councilmember McCall mentioned about emailing everybody this information. I'm assuming that means that was a unnoticed meeting.
No, I know, it was not a group email, it was individual.
But you still, it'd be a serial meeting?
No.
And so my question is, does that need to be put into our record, the emails, just so it's part of the record, so that's not a problem?
I would recommend putting it into the record.
Okay.
Even though it wasn't a group email, it was sent serially to each of the council members for your consideration. And so I think that should be put in the record.
Okay.
So I think you've heard some feedback here, and Becky is next.
Thank you. I think what we all want is not this, what feels very disrespectful downtown, in these vacant buildings left to basically rot. And I think one of our desires to have an ordinance is a reflection of our sense of frustration, that things don't seem to be working the way they should. I personally am left dumbfounded how someone can afford to own a building, presumably own it outright, and pay taxes and be able to afford that year after year after year, which makes me wonder about what level of taxes are being assessed. I am concerned about passing an ordinance when there might be other things that that could be working better. That said, I would really like to hear from the city attorney, both about the city of Everett, what they've done in Auburn, and the legality of that, and what that might look like in Pullman. And if you have some feedback on how can people afford? I mean, they're living a life definitely different than I'm living, where I cannot have empty buildings that are rotting and pay taxes on them. So I guess that's two questions. One is, why isn't this already working? That's why I think you're experiencing this level of frustration from council. And two, should we go to an ordinance? Can the city attorney speak to the legality of Auburn and Everett?
So those will be for the future discussion, yes. And
Right.
Mike?
When we do our presentation, I've been writing copious notes. We're going to review those really quick. RJ and I are working on this on a tag team process here just because of the width of it. If I can just get one clarification, because I heard it several times from several members, was the word accountability, holding people accountable. And as I'm going through my notes here and what was discussed, the only thing that I really was able to pull out as holding people accountable was the fines discussion. Is there any other items that I should be considering other than fines?
Yes, the reporting.
Go to Ann, and then we'll go to Megan.
Oh, pardon me. The reporting part of it, having them, in the Everett Code, it talks about having them register the building with the city. It's kind of like a licensing that we would do for a business, and then have maybe, code enforcement officers inspect it, or have them, and then they have to complete a report every year, the owners do, saying, stating what is their intention, is there something underway, I think that if we do that, it makes them a more part of the process as well.
Now, we have some reporting that goes through Whitcom, so our officers know at least the ownership or the management of it. So, but I don't know if that's how complete that is.
But I
know we
think
have that for
like a
some of it.
status report on the
right.
building every year, actually asking them, what do you do? What are your plans for this? And if I may add something pursuant to the previous discussion about the scope of the project, is it only downtown? Is it every building in town? I know we don't want to lose focus on our downtown buildings, but I would like to see some similar item for residential buildings as well, because I know personally people who have homes around them, near them, adjacent to them, that have stood vacant for a very long time, and there are infestation issues and other issues that are dangerous, and again, just very unattractive in otherwise attractive neighborhoods. So if it muddies our focus here too much, I understand that, but as long as we're doing it, maybe if we could include it somehow to, to include residential and/or rental properties.
Megan, you're
any
next.
Homes. Thank you.
So the one that I want to just really emphasize that made sense to me was the Everett code. I know Auburn's been brought up a couple of times, but Everett seemed more specific, and it did specifically speak to the idea of owners of vacant buildings registering with the city. It doesn't immediately go to a fine situation or levying a fine, but rather keeping that communication going where, we're expecting regular reports. It's not going to just sit vacant. To Becky's point, I don't know the accounting on their end. It would be fascinating to know, but I don't know if that's really our business. And my business as a council member is to look at the impact of this on our community. And I think most people will say it has detrimental impacts. So we've got to keep communication flowing, and I'm not against levying fines, but let's look at how to do some things in the beginning to just hold people accountable.
Eileen.
Yeah, I respectfully request that we, at this point, that we really stay focused on the downtown commercial district. It seems like once we sort of step into other areas, we get a little too diffuse, and then staff time becomes critical, and then we never really kind of get back to where we need to get. With the downtown project galloping along at the pace that it is, I think it's really important that we get this element in play and in place in a timely manner and not get too distracted. Although we do need other elements of that within our community. Our nuisance code is vague. The fines are minuscule. And there's very little that code enforcement can really do. It's a class 1 misdemeanor with a maximum $500 fine after a series of steps. So there's really not a whole lot there that's in our current code. But I really, really want to emphasize on downtown.
Okay. Any other comments? And also, I can think of a vacant building for years on Grand Avenue on North Grand that used to hold something in agriculture that just sits there. I think, I agree with the downtown because that's the main focus, but there's got to be some elements there that we can use on North Grand too.
Like I say, as far as I can tell you, we can draw the map any way we choose.
And when you say commercial, that qualifies on that one too. So, any other questions?
Nope, I've made eye contact with RJ. I feel really strong about this, and I think he feels stronger. How about that? Put words in your mouth? That's my guy. We'll continue working on this and bring a discussion, and we can continue to refine this, but thanks for the direction.
And I'm really appreciating this because we've been talking about it for a long time, and we need to do something. And we've talked about it, but this is where Thad can really show how, you know, a different city attorney just looks at the books and says, okay, let's go. So it's going to be on you now, man. So I just want to make
Thank
sure
you.
know. All right. With that, is there any new business to come before the council tonight? Seeing none, at this time, yes? Really quick.
All right. I just wanted to mention, and I know this had been put out in one of our social media blurbs, but the 988 National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is live, and so it's important for City of Pullman residents, whoever's watching, to understand if you are struggling or in crisis, help is available. So 988. So just wanted to mention that.
Well worth the time. At this time, the City Council will adjourn for an executive session. And while the provisions of the Open Public Meeting Act do not apply to discussions relating to the interpretation or application of a labor agreement or that portion of a meeting during which the governing body is planning or adopting a strategy or position to be taken during the course of any collective bargaining, professional negotiations or grievance or mediation proceedings, or reviewing the proposals made during the course of negotiations or proceedings, City Council is announcing its intention to discuss such matters in executive session. The executive session will last approximately 15 minutes. I have 8:36 right now. We're going to start the executive session at 8:40, and we'll go 15 minutes from 8:40. Thank you. This is the microphone we're using. Got another 10 years. Hey, mine's right on the money here. Let's see. So 8:54:45, someone can make the motion. Mike's going to make a notation. So Becky, you're close enough. Why don't you do it right now?
Move to adjourn?
Here's a second.
Second.
Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We now.
Or did you just think?